Hi, everybody, and welcome to the session. We are here to listen to Peter McClellan talk about Do No Harm, Disrupt the University, Anti-Racist ePortfolio Assignments. We're excited to have you all join us.
Sure. Thank you, Kevin. Hi, everybody. So my name, as Kevin said, is Peter McClellan. My pronouns are he, him. I currently reside and work on Muskogee Creek land here in Georgia. So before we start, I did want to note that this project was, designed, researched collaboratively with colleague Megan Haskins, who was unable to be here today. So if you hear me refer to a we, that's who I'm talking about. And I really am grateful and indebted to the work that she did on this project. I also do confess my anxiety here. I usually do not get anxious around conference presentations. I don't mind the attention, but it is a moment where I feel like something that's been developed collaboratively, I feel some sort of trepidation around presenting that. So I just want to kind of confess that as we start here. So also, and I guess this is for Kevin too, you all can feel free to interrupt with questions, and Kevin, if there are questions in the chat that feel pressing, feel free to, jump in and stop my roll. So what we're going to do today, I'll do a brief sort of definition of what anti-racist pedagogy is. And then we will talk for about 15 minutes on elements of anti-racist ePortfolio assignments. We'll move then into a sort of 10-minute workshop-ish time. And finally, we'll finish up with some reflection as a group. Also, in terms of today's session, I do want to make sure that everybody here understands we're here to learn and challenge any preconceived notions or biases. I hope that we will listen without judgment and be open to receive feedback. We'll discuss it a little bit later, but part of designing anti-racist learning spaces and assignments is this notion of calling in, not calling out. So inviting people into a conversation to encourage learning and change and growth, rather than shutting down discussion and opportunities for learning. If there's an argument, discuss the argument, not a person. And always make sure that details shared in breakout rooms are kept confidential. Okay, so my definition that I tend to use for anti-racist pedagogy comes from Alda Blankenly. It's 2005, so it's maybe a little dated, but I think it's direct. It gets to the point and is useful as a starting point for these conversations. So race itself is not an individual sin. It's a systemic force that operates throughout society. It's pervasive. We see it in our in our institutions, and it operates in such a way that Black, Indigenous, people of color, or as you'll see throughout the presentation and may have heard or seen, BIPOC as the acronym, makes people of color less upwardly mobile in society and routinely experience violences. Educational institutions are themselves part of the problem, so they replicate social structures that continually marginalize BIPOC. And educational institutions actively harm BIPOC students by alienating them, institutionalizing or tacitly encouraging racist practices and social interactions. Anti-racist pedagogy addresses these injustices by identifying racism's pervasiveness and actively working to remove it from society through anti-racist teaching and learning. So where do ePortfolios fit into this? So portfolios have the potential to do one of two things vis-a-vis the anti-racist project. So they can either participate in the project, so they can give students agency and ownership over their learning. They can center the student's story, not the faculty syllabi. They can clearly show the student as the creator of knowledge, not a white academy. They can also perpetuate violence against BIPOC students through things like unclear and unsupported ePortfolio assignments, which can lead to students feeling a sort of hidden curriculum exists. Hidden curricula generally reflect the cultural expectations of a white supremacist institution. The medium may also erroneously suggest that students share more about themselves than necessary, including traumatic stories. It could alternatively, or ePortfolios may alternatively, if they're unclear, communicate that students share less than is needed or healthy for a strong reflective assignment or for a learning opportunity. So our intervention here is through assignment design. So perhaps the most immediate way ePortfolio practitioners can affect anti-racist change is through designing effective assignments. We offer 5 elements here. This is not an exhaustive list of ePortfolio assignment design. I do want to acknowledge that before I get to the list, some of these elements that you see here probably feel familiar already. And this is not an accident because good pedagogy is anti-racist. So I hope that this can feel empowering to some of you who feel like you are intentional teachers, but maybe worry that equity-focused teaching is out of your reach because it's not. I also, along the same lines, you'll probably see some citations and references here to work that's familiar, but you're like, hey, that's not explicitly anti-racist work. Again, this is something that we feel fits under these principles, and when done well, is also doing the work of racial justice. So we are going to spend the next 15 minutes or so elaborating on these. So the first being racism needs to be named as part of an assignment and or in class work. 2, you should always build in the why behind the work you are asking students to do. 3, assignments should offer both structure or guidance and encourage freedom to explore. 4, compassion must be centered through shared learning and student support. And 5, we want to celebrate students, their work, and their knowledge. So to the first point, racism is pervasive, it's pernicious, and it is infused throughout the academy. It's also often invisible, especially to white practitioners, meaning racism and white supremacy continue to harm BIPOC students, even when we are unaware. Administrations and faculties, mainly white, are ill-equipped to address racism in the academy because it has been created and maintained by white people for the benefit of white people. When students are given the opportunity to see whiteness, even their own whiteness, they can then begin to analyze or critique it. So some examples of how this might work. I take this example and stretch it for sure from Sophie Bell, who has offered sort of a basic way of thinking about doing anti-racist assignment design within the classroom. So she recommends, and well, I'm going to say I recommend because I don't want to put words in her mouth, but this is taken from her. It's inspired by Sophie Bell, but I encourage people to engage with discussions of race from BIPOC scholars in your own field, and students can then reflect on their identity within the disciplinary classroom. So this doesn't mean you have to, you don't have to go out and look for sort of critical race theory, sort of generally. You have scholars of color within your field, and they are doing work, and many of them are reflecting on what it's like to be scholars of color within your field, and that is an effective place to start. You should also treat student writing as a text for future analysis. So follow up with reflection on their reflection. This honors students as sites of knowledge creation. So treating student work as a text, treating their writing as a text in the same way that you would treat a scholar's work as a text, kind of gives them, it's an empowering move to see them as the places where knowledge itself is created. Any feedback that you provide throughout this reiterative writing process should affirm their identities and focus on asking questions. So let the student drive the conversation around identity, and then you can ask the pointed questions to get more detail out of them. All writing work with discussion should be interspersed with discussion and resources in and around race and identity, so that student work is also being informed by further scholarship in the field. And finally, this is an opportunity for you to decenter yourself as the instructor, to allow students to drive drive learning and allow you to sort of learn more about yourself as a teacher. So number 2, building in the why. So anti-racist assignments should make the value of an assignment more explicit. Many of us here are familiar with the notion of explaining why an assignment exists to build buy-in or simply for clarity. The practice, I don't know, I just lost sound. Did you guys, are we back? We good?
You are still going strong.
Okay, great. Okay. So the practice of building in the why into an assignment can eliminate what's often called the hidden curriculum, in which a teacher might assume certain parameters of strong work that are culturally situated. So things like professionalism or organization or formal language is usually something that's reflecting the instructor's own social location. And students may not be steeped in these notions, and meaning they are going to need more resources to succeed in your class and with the assignment. So positioning the assignment by making the outcome for an assignment clear, instructors position students to draw connections and make meaning within their work. Within ePortfolio practice, students can position their experience within a larger context. They can draw connections between experiences and make meaning of the larger picture. Reynolds and Patton in 2014 described these connections as thinking about thinking, where students engage in thought work around why certain assignments are valuable and the process by which they will be completed. And also balance, there should be a balance of guided outcomes. So you should outline specific questions that address the what, the so what, and the what now as a model of student reflection. So a prescribed model of reflection can provide clarity, but many contribute to a focus on positive stories that mask critical elements of realities. So you also have the opportunity here to note the importance of inviting students to tell stories that involve the complex systems they interact with, including critiques of the institution or your own classroom. So an example of this sort of change to an assignment would be helping students think about areas where harm might be done for them, like expression of their identity in a platform that can be seen by others. They should also know the risks and benefits of reflection in front of an audience. And artifact curation should be explained pretty clearly. So what exactly do you want from them? And what are you open to in terms of artifacts for reflection? This can also generate a discussion between you and the students about what they think an artifact should be. So you can make that artifact curation process a more sort of discursive moment in the classroom. All right, so number 4, balancing structure and freedom. So similar to our reasons for building in the why, we argue that assignment design needs to assume that the requirements are unclear and need to be structured transparently. By the same token, expectations of what good work looks like should be open, focused on outcomes that value real learning, not arbitrary requirements. Student discussions of knowledge arising from their social location should be rewarded, allowing them to see themselves within their own learning. So in terms of structure, when we create an assignment, we should clearly explain what knowledge looks like within your discipline or your course, and what it looks like to demonstrate learned knowledge within that context. We should clearly name the assignment stakeholders and audience. And we should require students to begin an ePortfolio project with a reflection, however brief, on who they are within a given context. For example, as a student in your class, in the college, throughout their lives, as a place for them to kind of think of themselves as situated knowledge producers and scholars. In terms of freedom, students should be encouraged to look anywhere to find relevant knowledge, to build both a feeling of agency and integrative learning skills, allowing students to make the connection or to build investment. And also, you should use a highly customizable ePortfolio platform to give students the most latitude to express that knowledge. So the example I use here is from a piece by Snepvangers and Bulger in 2016 with Indigenous students, I believe, in New Zealand. They explore iterative ePortfolio assignments, and I expand on that a little bit here. So this is what I mean by iterative is there's sort of reading, writing, some sort of encounter with another that then is followed by reflection and bouncing back and forth into the eventual creation of a portfolio. The course should be designed around exposure to other contexts, ways of thinking, and there should be guidelines for kind of what that exposure space looks like. So some examples of that might be interviews with community members. It could be role-playing games. This one's near and dear to my heart as a D&D nerd. I find these particularly interesting because you can ask students to do research into a particular context, play that person, embody it, and encounter other people who are also playing in a particular context. And role-playing games, by definition, use rules. And so you can kind of create some safety within that space for negotiation to happen through play. Experiential learning opportunities. This is an exciting one, especially if you have an active experiential learning office. Getting them involved in your class can be exciting because they will have, I have no doubt they will have resources on how to do experiential learning, even if you're not building in field trips into your course. They might have some thoughts on what experiential learning actually means because the definition might be broader than you expect. And then finally, just readings from diverse authorship. So even if you aren't going to have folks meet up with students, engaging with a wide range of authors, coupled with sort of contextual resources or resources that explore other contexts, like videos, audio, podcasts, things like that, can sort of build that encounter experience. And following each experience with reflection, elicited by prompts focused on analyzing that experience further, and student reaction to those experiences can help them see themselves as knowledge creators, thinking about knowledge within context, and usually a final storytelling project that then takes that sort of scaffolded experience, but gives them the freedom to discuss sort of how they reacted to that learning. Is often a great way to build in that freedom to an also structured space. So then we also discussed centering compassion and shared learning. So and compassion and shared learning with support for students. So this begins before any assignment is given. Our classrooms must be spaces for compassion, especially during the hard work of learning. If ePortfolios are a place for genuine meaning making through reflection on experiences, we should also be prepared for students to work through real hardship, trauma, and loss. It is our role as teachers to build a caring culture where anti-racist teaching and learning can happen safely. In this context, instructors should establish what compassion as a classroom culture looks like and hold themselves and students accountable to that expectation. So some resources and topics include providing context for ways in which language has been policed to support white supremacy, and provide ways that the classroom culture will work to disrupt this. Discuss how to respond to aggressions within the classroom using a model of calling in and inviting to discussion rather than calling out and shaming or shutting down, because that cuts off the opportunities for learning, especially in a classroom that is going to be a diverse space. And then amplifying multiple ways of knowing and sharing knowledge. So within the classroom space, we hope that you would foster a culture of learning that's going to focus on process and differentiated opportunities for students to receive support from different sources. So this can be peer review, and the peer review can be a lot more brainstorming on organization and idea generating than just editing and polishing, because again, if we're thinking about language, editing is itself can be a violent experience when the real meat of communication is within that idea generating process. Also, make sure that they have scaffolded support. So writing centers can be a resource. ePortfolio student examples can be a resource. If you have an ePortfolio specialist at your institution, definitely getting in contact with them. You don't have to be the expert. I've also found that ePortfolio vendors often have some pretty robust resources for students that are pretty accessible, not just around the technical side of things, but also with so anti-racist assignments finally should celebrate student storytelling and work. White supremacy has centered a dominant way of communicating and devalued different ways of knowledge producing and communicating that knowledge. And portfolios are a chance for students to showcase and celebrate their own voices and for us to amplify multiple identities. In this way, we hope that you will celebrate students to decenter current traditional rhetoric, to reject the idea that there's only one way to communicate and amplify multiple forms of communication, that you will amplify individual voices to make space for students to make linguistic choices, and honor nonlinear success stories to recognize and amplify students' narratives that don't paint the institution as a beacon of success, instead weaving in their personal definitions of growth and success, even when it runs contrary to what the institution values. I am going to move on to we'll have a sort of workshop-y sort of time here, but and I'll have an example from my institution here, but I do want to stop and see if there are any questions that have arisen. Can I clarify anything? I'm also going to take this as a chance to drink water. And my daughter is home and her dog is barking. Cool. All right, so I am briefly just going to copy some links and throw them in the chat here. So what I've thrown in the chat here are 3 links. I'm going to be talking about our milestone assignment and particularly how we've revised it with some anti-racist goals in mind. I am not going to do screen share of any of those things. I'll just kind of do a summary of them. But if you want to take a look at the PDFs, there's the Oxford milestone assignment number 1 is our original draft. Number 2 is a revised draft. And the worksheet I will discuss briefly in just a second. So we have found at Oxford, for those who don't know, this isn't like the Oxford. This is Oxford College of Emory University. We are a 2-year institution. I think we're just as fine as the English establishment. Our students get a pretty intentional liberal arts experience before moving on for their junior and senior year to Emory College in Atlanta. Emory College provides a little bit more of a sort of professional focus for students, and Oxford, we prohibit our students from declaring a major. They get to take a lot of liberal arts gen eds, and it's an all residential campus, so it's a pretty unique space. And I've found it an exciting place to think about ePortfolio learning. But all that said, as with all places, because racism and white supremacy are pervasive, we have found systemic injustices at our school, and our student voices in their ePortfolios have been that place that have allowed us to start doing some of this work. It's been a sort of exciting revelation, and also very troubling too. So we will talk about that here. So some of the early problems that we found with, well, actually, before I get to that, I should mention some of what we found in terms of systemic inequities at our institution. We started coding some of our early portfolios, and also took a look at some early faculty assessments in our pilots. And what our students were showing was there's some things we kind of knew, but we're seeing how students were expressing them in different ways, and then some things we saw for the first time. So we saw things like students of color receiving more critical marks from their from faculty readers on their portfolios. We saw international students who make up, I think it's 18% of our student body, expressing extreme loneliness throughout their time at Oxford. First generation students experiencing imposter syndrome. And finally, perhaps most disturbingly, many of these students understood these things as sort of baked into the college experience as natural and normal, as things that they should, that they could get used to or be resilient in front of, rather than challenging the fact that these problems exist. And so we wanted to begin to address that. And the first place we began to address that was with our milestone. So we found that the milestone assignment early on tacitly encouraged heroic narratives of overcoming adversity, of sort of starting out your freshman year as somebody who didn't know what was going on, and by the time you were a sophomore, you had everything figured out and you were going to be a doctor. So we felt we needed to, in the terms of this presentation, we needed to build in the why we have students do this in a way that was that did not encourage those heroic narratives. We found that our assignment lacked specificity, so students were guessing at what they needed to do to create a strong milestone project. So we had trouble balancing structure versus freedom. There was an assumed academic norm within for what students should produce. So again, that goes back to building in the why. And we also assumed that students belonged and found belonging at Oxford. We didn't, it's like the assignment didn't even conceive that there'd be people who would feel lonely, alienated, or actively hurt by our institution. We failed to name racism and center compassion in certain parts of the assignment. I will say, we did pretty well with centering compassion in the way that a lot of this program was created. I think that's a goal of our faculty, but the assignment itself was clearly difficult for a lot of students emotionally. And I will also say that the revision that you all are looking at is our first revision, and we are now doing our second revision. So some of these things continue to persist. And we would expect them to persist even after our second, third, fourth, fifth revision, right? That this is something that's going to be pernicious and we need to follow it. And so as we revised, the first thing we decided to do was build our assessment of the program, not just sort of like as a self-reflective bit for the curriculum, but actually assessment of our institution. So our students are giving us fantastic narratives that when coded can show us where we are succeeding or failing as a college. We also can now are thinking about creating a culture of reflection by building in what am I trying to say? The reflective work into different parts of our curriculum, so that the assignment for the milestone, the reflection, isn't just happening, in their final semester or just happening when they meet with their advisors, but is their milestone reflections are being done across the curriculum and then being put into the milestone portfolio. So when they do their final semester sort of reflection and gussying up the portfolio, they are seeing sort of trajectory of learning and growth that might be surprising for them. And then finally, we're formalizing, as I alluded to, this persistent revision of the assignment. So we are consistently, every summer is a new revision of the assignment based on what we've learned from students past, what they've told us through their portfolios. Okay, so any questions so far? I know I've done a lot of talking. I hope that's not going to shut down future conversation. So anyway, what I want to do now is turn the critique back onto your own institution or your own work. So we are going to jump into breakout rooms. I'm looking, what are the numbers we have here? So maybe if we end up doing about 3 breakout rooms of 5, Kevin.
Sounds good.
And so what we'll do, the link in the chat that had the the worksheet on there. I'll just do it again in case new people jumped in. So what I'll have you do is sift through your computer or whatever your LMS is. You can look at your institution's website for an assignment or some sort of student-facing document if you're not involved in teaching in the classroom. And then, come on, there we go. Use that worksheet to identify at least use that worksheet to identify at least one area where you could revise that assignment or document using one of the anti-racist elements we outlined. And then consider how you can revise it in line with these elements. So what's an actionable change that you can make there. There's also some suggested discussion questions for you all in the worksheet if you are feeling more like chatting than you are doing homework. Yeah, let's take some time in groups and come back in let's say 10 minutes. Welcome back, everybody. What'd you talk about? Well, I'll start with a more directed question. Ask first. Were there any commonalities between your experiences, or any common sorts of? Yeah, we'll start there. Any common threads?
I see heads nodding.
Sure, I'll jump in because Catherine and I we work at different institutions, but at both our institutions, our schools are rolling out a new gen ed curriculum that uses e-portfolios in some way, shape, or form. And I think as I was listening to Catherine share out, it was just, I said, like, you could be a member of our team and say what you just said, and it reflects conversations we're having bi-weekly about navigating the landscape and trying to take this pedagogy that has such potential to really kind of cut across the life of the university, but like to lead that project is really challenging, and there's a lot of like minds to navigate, especially integrating like the DEI considerations we've talked about today.
And Peter, thanks, Matt, for sharing that. And I'm glad that you were able to find some commonalities across institutions. It's good to hear. Peter, with the 2 minutes we have left, what would be a good way to pull this all together? And are there resources you want to share with the participants?
Yes, actually, let me, pull it up. I'm just going to pull up here. So for anybody who wants to just squint, there's the references. Happy to send them to you if you want them. I think the only other thing that I would encourage you all to do is, if you have questions, feel free to get in touch with me. Megan also has graciously put her email out there and has said you guys can contact her as well. Both of us are happy to chat. And I'll also plug, since it was brought up by Catherine in our breakout room, Digital Ethics Task Force is, we are soliciting new members. So you can check that out on ABLE's website. There's a form, and we're not scary. We're a lot of fun. Kevin's on it. We don't bite. I don't know. We do good work.
And there will be sessions related to the task force later today. So keep an eye on the program.
Yeah. So thank you all. I hope this was helpful, and I'm looking forward to connecting in the future. So everybody have a great evening.
All right. Well, in my role as the moderator, I'll thank you, Peter, for a fantastic session, highly engaging, and remind everyone that there's still more to come.